Hello folks, it's me, DeMontropolis, and I am finally wrapping up the Mega Man NES hexalogy with Mega Man 6, released in 1993. This conclusion to a whole era of NES Mega Man games was developed by Capcom alongside the franchise's first big spin-off, Mega Man X for the Super NES. Whereas that game sought to reinvent the series, Mega Man 6 continued to build off its predecessors and the expectations that came with it. But due to the declining support on the NES, it was Nintendo that published it in America, not Capcom, and the game wouldn't see a Europe release until 20 years later. With each previous game getting so many different mechanics, each unique from the last, it was almost inevitable that Mega Man would fuse with Rush to create the two adapters unique to this game. Despite this, Mega Man 6 isn't remembered as fondly as its brothers, because at the time, audiences were generally getting sick and tired of the amount of classic Mega Man games getting pumped out, at a yearly rate mind you. Does that notion still ring true today, or is there something more hidden under the surface? Well, let's find out. Mega Man 6. If you've watched my Mega Man 5 review, I started off by saying that Mega Man 5 had the best controls in the hexalogy. I bring this up because Mega Man 6 did a complete 180 with its engine. Before I go into specifics, I want to stress how this is not just how I feel about the controls. They actually are much heavier and wonkier than what you've come to expect, and not for the better. Mega Man's more sticky and falls faster, to the point where it actually impacts your progression across levels, and makes certain platforming a lot scarier than it should be. Generally speaking, Mega Man also takes a bit longer to enter his next state, which is why you might see him standing or walking in the air after a ledge or ladder, and ice physics especially got screwed. Before this game, Mega Man 4 established that tippy-toeing won't do anything on ice, as you take much longer to accelerate into a walk. Here, you get launched if you so much as think about moving, which can make a challenge like this first 1-up in Blizzard Man stage much more grueling. Another big problem with the controls are that you cannot jump out of a slide, a flaw we haven't seen since Game Boy 2. Why does it come back? Hell do I know. I've said it before, but jumping out of a slide is crucial to the mechanic's functionality, part of what makes it fun. Now it's robbed, and half of the time, I never think about using the slide to enhance my playstyle during enemy combat. The slide also has a cooldown to it. It's very brief, but Mega Man has to stand still after a slide is performed. If you jump, he stands still. If you let him finish it, he has to stand still before he can move. All these things further limit the slide's intended mobility, and while you could just turn around to cancel it early, that's something you could already do in prior games. When it comes to the charge shot, it has thankfully been nerfed both in size and as a byproduct of the new enemies. However, releasing the charge shot does not actually play a unique sound, just the regular buster sound. It's a small thing, but it removes the satisfaction of unleashing an attack 3 times the strength of your primary one. You can even say it removes the sauce of using your charge shot. This game also keeps the mechanic of losing the charge shot upon taking damage. I'm still against this. It's no fun getting smacked and losing your chance to deal a big blow because of it, especially against bosses. Speaking of, boss iframes are a tad longer than they were in Mega Man 5, to the point where charge shots now feel like the only way to defeat a boss in a timely manner when it comes to Buster only. This last bit about the controls is arguably the most detrimental. Jump inputs can get eaten on occasion and lead to easy frustration. While it is easier to reproduce with the adapters thanks to that initial squat when you land, it still happens without them. It's more harmful than you think. Being able to jump in a certain situation can make the difference between taking damage or not, falling in a pit or not. And for this mechanic to be so finicky really says something about the game's state of polish. But let's get into some positives. The Robot Masters this time around have a thematically interesting premise, as they each come from different parts of the world to compete in the first annual robot tournament. This gives the Robot Masters designs that are both more unique, colorful, and add-ons to recurring themes. Centaur Man is based on the mythical creature and stands out from basically anyone. Plant Man's sprite got away with 7 colors owing to his beauty, and Flame Man, while still being a fire-themed boss, adds onto that theme with his Arabian origin. Following in suit with Mega Man 5's graphics, this game is just beyond beautiful and truly captures the essence of each world region. While both the Nightman and Yamato Man stage take place in a castle or fortress, you actually get a nice view of the outside before breaking in. Then later on you get a glimpse of the time of day's progression. Tomahawk Man stage is pretty similar here too. You start in the western buttes in broad daylight, but the next time you emerge, you get this powerful sunset beaming against these smaller canyons. Even stages without that kind of detail still remain eye-catching. Like the only kind of sky visible within the dense jungle of Plantman stage is through the silhouette of the trees, and that has always captivated me. Certain stages are also given a second palette if you revisit them, giving these stages a fresh new look and making them more visually interesting. It's only done for 4 stages, but these are the only ones that give you a real incentive to come back a second time, unlike the one up in Flame Man stage. Man, that's such a time waster. God. The Robot Masters themselves are even introduced with a unique presentation compared to any other set. When you select a stage, instead of just seeing them appear and do a pose, they appear alongside a grid that displays some statistics like weight, energy source, attack, defense, mobility. They're ultimately meaningless, but it's funny to compare them and ask questions. Like, why does Yamato Man have super high attack and defense countered by poor mobility, even though he can jump very high and his attacks do standard damage? Whatever. Boss intros additionally have the Robotmaster slowly fall down with random lightning, a more edgy way to bring them into the picture. Unfortunately, this game still missed the mark with its stage select, as Mega Man is still not looking around at the Robotmasters you have selected. You can miss out on that detail once, but if it's missed twice in a row, something definitely went wrong. When it comes to the story, we have, quote-unquote, a new villain, Mr. X. He's the founder of the first annual robot tournament and took those Robot Masters under his control. Even before the truth about his identity is revealed, he's not someone I can take seriously. He claims that he's been using Dr. Wily as a puppet until he didn't need him anymore. But even then, he's just doing the same thing Wily always does. If he's not doing anything special, then what's the point? Well, there is none, and thanks to Mega Man 4 and 5, this plot twist trope has been so overdone by this point that it's easy to see coming. Once Dr. Wily tears off his fake beard and spectacles, it's such easy joke material to feign surprise from how sudden this was. I will say though, the ending is pretty good. Dr. Wily doesn't have an escape plan this time after surrender, and if this was the first or second game, Mega Man would just leave it at that. But here, hell no, he's tired of his shit. Roped him up like a Western outlaw and threw him in prison. I also got a chuckle of the line that says the only thing Wily rules over now is his containment cell. Since this is one of the few games where the recurring antagonist of the series actually gets some sort of comeuppance, it makes the ending a bit more appealing. Like its contemporaries, Mega Man 6 has a strong OST backing up its presentation. While songs are not immediately catchy, they have a lot of care put into the compositions and power through the chiptune limitations. Certain songs like Blizzard Man Stage and Wily Stage give a sense of melancholy and courage brewing, almost like the game is aware that it marks the end of an era for Mega Man. Other songs like Flame Man Stage, Night Man Stage, and Tomahawk Man Stage help enhance the thematic settings those levels take place in. When you obtain weapons, the weapon get screen you come across is not only visually cool with the high profile animation, but it also introduces tutorials of what the weapons do before you use them in the field. Granted, Mega Man GB4 did this before, but this is the first time we see it happen in the mainline console games. Now let's move on to the actual level design. You'll be quick to notice these unique set pieces across the Robotmaster stages, and they aren't just memorable, they're fun to go through. Centaur Man stage is usually known for being the obligatory water stage, but there's one strange area where the water is upside down. Not only do you need this to traverse a large spike pit, but the enemies here can use it to their advantage. Nightman stage has this bouncy castle area, genius concept by the way, that tasks you with avoiding the spines by learning the crazy movement of your bounces. Lastly, Blizzard Man stage has this submarine rising up and down, and projectiles from both you and enemies don't follow the movement, something you need to pick up on while steering clear of spikes from above and below. Among these set pieces are areas with genuine challenge backing them up. Earlier Nightman stage is a spike ceiling rising up and down with chains. In addition to a terrifying sound, it's simple enough to get through with sliding, but allows tighter jumps and maneuvers to be done so it can be cleared faster. Plantman stage might just be the best stage in the game with its usage of springs in the finale. There are pit-hopping fish, beetles ambushing you, and an otherwise unremarkable turret using those same springs to become a scary obstacle. Unfortunately, there are some gimmicks that get horribly underused or overlooked. Flameman stage has oil that restricts your movement and your jump height, but later on, the stage puts all its money on these fire enemies setting the oil alight and turning it into an insta-kill hazard. The problem with this is that after the first few screens, the oil's initial mechanic is forgotten, reducing oil to just a visual warning for what is essentially reskinned spikes. This collapsing yellow bridge here appears only once and has nothing going for it. Conveyor belts are used infrequently in both Nightman stage and Yamato Man stage, only amounting to a futile distraction in a few rooms. Only one room in the game has Yoku blocks, and they can be completely ignored, thanks to a split path letting you do so. The one that bothers me the most is this one-sided spike platform, only appearing twice in the entire game, and both of those appearances being in separate stages, in the most random areas, and they each have no intention on properly using its mechanic, other than just throwing in a platform in there. If there's one gimmick that's horrendously executed on an objective level, it's the peat dispensers in Mr. X4. These tubes spawn enemies in a fixed interval, but right away you'll notice problems with the implementation. The design of the tubes give it a hollow look, but you cannot see the eggs rising up from inside it. The eggs instead spawn right as they come out of the tube, so standing on them is not ideal, but something you're forced to do. There are also these indestructible X blocks that can be pushed by Power Adapter, and they only exist to seal off the tubes, stopping the peats from spawning. However, the blocks don't crush the peats in any way, both a huge missed opportunity and a lack of attention to detail. One of the better aspects of Mega Man 6's stages are the amount of split paths. Whereas Mega Man 4 was dabbling in the idea, this game goes all out. Half the stages in the game have at least 2 branching paths, and this greatly enhances replay value of the game as a whole. Depending on your Robot Master order, you may end up going through completely different areas of stages, some of which even have unique challenges to them. Some of these split paths also lend themselves to very creative secrets. In Mr. X1, there's this cracked window that leads to a very quick shortcut to the end, but since Power Adapter is the only thing that can bust it, you must do this tricky platforming challenge with the clunky adapter, and your ultimate reward is 4 1-ups! I gotta admit, seeing this for the first time caught me off guard. Like, holy! Another good mention is the split path in Wily 1 that rewards a lot of goodies. It requires Jet Adapter, but you must already be hovering in the screen prior before you reach that area, and I'll tell you, simply getting there was a very satisfying challenge to overcome. The Energy Balancer makes its grand debut in the mainline games as well, being tied to a simple and straightforward challenge with the Power Adapter, and is actually delivered to you by Proto Man, his only appearance in the game. While the Energy Balancer is not as effective as it was in Game Boy 4, it should still be applauded for appearing in at least one of the NES games. Better late than never, they say. Even Beat returns as an unlockable, but the requirement is different this time. You only need 4 letters, but they are now delegated to adapter-only split paths at the end of certain Robot Master stages. These paths are at the very end of the stage, and if you came there without the correct adapter, it's very obvious that you missed out on something. However, with the way the game is structured, these paths aren't balanced very well. In fact, the number of them is imbalanced by this notion of correct paths. What I mean is that once you realize Flame Man and Plant Man give you the adapters, they'll always be your go-to first picks, allowing you to take all the adapter exclusive paths and ignore the others forever, unless you purposefully play Mega Man games in a random stage order. Ow! Was that an E-Tank? Oh, not this time! I came prepared. What up, 2? Huh. Whew, that was close. I almost forgot this is Mega Man 6. Somehow this game surpassed Mega Man 4 for most E-Tanks, with a whopping 17 available. And if you count all the Eddies, that goes up to 22 E-Tanks. And there's only 16 bosses, so even without Eddie Cheese, dying through damage is virtually impossible. There's a very high amount of 1-ups too, 14 to be exact, and up to 19 with Eddie. Normally, I don't have a problem with this, but since this game stops counting 1-ups at 9, there's no incentive to go for them by the time you reach that cap. And remember that correct path thing I was going on about earlier? This also affects the 1-ups and E-tanks available to you in the Robot Master stages, with the problem being that so many of these valuable goodies are locked behind adapters. To make my point clear, the only E-tank that's available to you without adapters in these stages, minus Eddie, is the one in Flame Man stage, conveniently the stage that gives you Power Adapter. Now, looking at Blizzard Man stage, there are 2 1-ups and 2 E-tanks to grab there. Insanely good haul, but all of them are locked behind both Flame Blast and Power Adapter. And since Blizzard Man is weak to Flame Blast, why would you not go to Flame Man beforehand? In short, going for Flame Man first and Plant Man second pretty much guarantees you beat the game, with all the goodies you're getting. But in a reverse scenario where these 2 are left for last, you'll be left starving for an abnormally long time. This mentality also applies to the Fortress stages, and they can get frustrating and mind-numbing with how much they force the player to use both adapters. It goes against the whole grain of Fortress stage design, where yes, you do have all weapons and utilities available and are expected to use them. Here, pretty much every screen and every other room encourages or outright demands you use the adapters. This gives you very little time to experiment with weapons, and even when you go out of your way to use weapons, that just means you have to spend more time on the pause menu via switching to these adapters. As such, the only time I really use weapons are against bosses, or in the more obnoxious setups like the Peat Dispensers and Mr. X4. On the subject of adapters, let's actually talk about them. The Jet Adapter is your only utility, in the sense that it lets you reach great heights. Due to it being a jetpack, your hovering is flexible in its control, giving you an easier time against some of the more difficult platforming challenges. Despite Mega Man's heavier falling speed in this game, the Jet Adapter lets you fly over grounded obstacles, rub your head against the ceiling, and even duel against aerial threats. It's quite fun for what it's worth, even though I don't find much use for it in combat over the weapons. The only downside with both adapters is that you can't slide, but in a game where the slide is buggy, is it really a downside to begin with? While the Jet Adapter can prove powerful in the right hands, my favorite would actually go to the Power Adapter. Although its clunkiness makes it less than ideal for platforming, Power Adapter can dish out many types of short-range punches. The fully charged punch not only does the most damage, but it can shatter enemy defenses, break blocks, and has been given a lot of unique interactions. You can push certain enemies away, and in the case of Curlingers, knock them into each other. Against bosses though, is where the Power Adapter can truly shine. All Robot Masters get knocked back by Power Adapter's full force, which interrupts their pattern, most noticeable being Plant Man. Some Fortress bosses like the X-Crusher actually become more fun to fight with Power Adapter in play. Instead of just hiding in the left corner, something you would have to do with any other weapon, you can knock him back constantly and get in a clean rhythm. If there's one thing that actually sucks about the adapters, it's when you select them. There are these cutscenes that play every time you equip the adapters. They exist to show Mega Man actually fusing with Rush and doing a quick demonstration, but if you let them run, each cutscene will eat up at least 10 seconds of your time. Thankfully you can skip them, but you have to hold down the pause button while doing so for the quickest way out. If you just press that button, you can only leave once Rush becomes visible. Why didn't these get shown in the weapon get screen? And why is it so finicky to get out of the pause menu in a timely manner? Ugh, whatever. Weapons are a little on the imbalanced side, as per usual, funnily enough. The good weapons, though, are very strong and fun to use. Centaur Flash is your average screen nuke, but it kills most enemies right away and gets the job done. Flame Blast is the strongest, with each shot doing 4 damage and cleanly wiping out most enemies and mid-bosses in 4 hits or less, though this is balanced by a poor trajectory. The runner-ups, Night Crusher and Silver Tomahawk, do 3 damage, but make up for that with greater trajectories. Night Crusher can be aimed and its many arcs make it easy to use. Silver Tomahawk instead has a fixed arc that covers an infinite range, and once mastered, you can deal massive damage from anywhere. And that's only 4 weapons, one half of the set. The other half is on the opposite spectrum. Blizzard Attack may have the perk of killing certain enemies instantly, but the tiny snowflakes are likely to miss enemies and use up way too much ammo. Plant Barrier functions the same as Skull Barrier and can even pierce through shields, but you can only use it 7 times before you're out. Definitely the worst weapon in the game. Both Windstorm and Yamato Spear do 2 damage, which isn't bad, but their unique concepts come off as awkward and underwhelming. Windstorm's perk is carrying enemies off screen with the killing blow, but they can still damage you while flying off. And Yamato Spear's whole gimmick of piercing shields is outclassed, leaving you with one of the most bland weapons in the series. When it comes to Beat himself, he's unfortunately not as useful as he was in Mega Man 5, or even GB4. He still attacks enemies for you, and is actually a bit faster too. However, Beat always insta-kills enemies and subtracts ammo based on his target's HP, or what he had left. This puts him in the field for much less time, because most enemies have more than 2 HP. If you send Beat at a Squidon, a big enemy who has 16 HP, that uses 16 ammo right away. Yes, it's a one-shot, but it's not as cost-efficient compared to the stronger weapons. And to top it off, Beat can't even attack bosses anymore. One big issue I take with Mega Man 6 are most of the enemies. There's many individual problems across the board, but to start, let's talk about the ones that are way more annoying than they should be. The Canopellers appear way too much across the endgame stages, and are one case where this cool explosion sound becomes obnoxious from how overplayed it is. The Submarine Flyer is introduced in a strange way, plopping on top of you and being really hard to shake off, something that gets carried over to their firepower as well. The Yafu fans not only confuse me on a conceptual level, don't even get me started on that, but since they hang out very close to spikes and are likely to force you into them, they can become very frustrating. The absolute worst enemy in the game, though, has to be Pooker. I hate this guy. Not because he's a difficult enemy, but he can only be killed with the Charge Buster or the Power Adapter. Nothing else in your arsenal works, and I wouldn't mind this if he didn't appear so often across the game. In Flame Man stage, he's fine for the most part, since he doubles as a gimmick platform. But why do you exist in Centaur Man stage? For one screen. His biggest crime is in Mr. X3, scattered everywhere in a stage where you want to hold on to Jet Adapter as much as you can, tying back into my issue with the Fortress stages in general. I've about had it with you, Pooker. I don't think you should exist anymore. Die! Moving on from the annoying ones, some enemies are criminally underused. Blizzard Man stage starts off with 3 seals, which are never seen again past their introduction. Yamato Man stage is also victim to this, with its many split paths making it easy to miss out on unique enemies. There is a limited edition of the Dachshund from the previous game, who only appears once in all of Mega Man 6. I kid you not, you can just walk forward while mindlessly shooting and this enemy just dies. A miserable existence. There's also these spring-face bombs, only in this stage, and all 3 of them are swept away, even with Jet Adapter. I will never understand how the enemy got a spotlight in the game's Japanese box art. Lastly, there are some very strange enemy placements in certain levels, or lack of. I did praise Nightman stage for its creative gimmicks, but it has so many enemies that appear once and only once in that stage. Then, somehow, the stage gets away with 3 screens in a row with no enemies. This particular conveyor belt room looks unfinished, because any other game would have put enemies in a room like that, even Mega Man 4 and 5. Compared to the previous game, Mega Man 6 does try to step it up with its mid-bosses, having 3 instead of just 1. However, some of these designs came off as baffling or underwhelming. The Gorilla Tank is an exception though, I like him. Now, compare him to the Met Dispenser, who we meet in a Western themed stage, and it's like, what happened here? Lastly, Gamarn and Gamadayu are an optional duo, as they require you to have Power Adapter before you can fight them. But funnily enough, Power Adapter is their biggest weakness, as they only take 2 reflected bombs to the face before they die. Now for the actual bosses. Most of them aren't great, but there's a few Robot Masters who actually do give a good battle. Blizzard Man's attacks manage to feel fair and tense no matter where you're standing, especially when you consider that his main attack has semi-random formations. Nightman has a shield that blocks most attacks, so if you don't have his weakness, you gotta learn how to sneak around it. Tomahawk Man is the closest to being the most difficult with his tendency to corner you, but with good enough reaction you can avoid being cornered and dodge his attacks just fine. The rest of the Robot Masters, however, are overall very slow and uninspired. Plant Man is the most basic, but then there's Flame Man, who has nothing special to offer once you find the right distance. Same goes for Wind Man, to the point where he might actually be easier than Plant Man. The other two are held back by lousy patterns, with Centaur Man staying still for way too long, and Yamato Man having a very noticeable blind spot that guarantees safety from his attacks. As for the Fortress bosses, these are some of the most soulless and brain-dead the series has ever seen. Rounder 2 and Tank CS2 are perfect examples where you can tell that developers had the mindset of this being mere homework instead of passion. Both Matonger Z and X-Crusher have very basic attacks that hardly take advantage of their designs, outside of Power Adapter for the latter. Mechazaurus and Wily Machine 6 are the furthest from what I would call brain-dead, but they still have their issues. Mechazaurus has a blind spot that keeps you safe from all harm, and for some reason, they gave all 3 phases of Wily's final battle the same weakness, making it very easy to steamroll. Power Piston, though, is just atrocious. As the boss is always dropping rocks, the explosion sound gets churned into white noise, to the point where my ears get relieved to hear the sound of Mega Man taking damage. Both the rocks and projectile spam also have you pinned to the corner. And yes, this puts you in position to use Silver Tomahawk, but fighting this boss with anything else is made into a long and horrific process, especially with trying to hit the tiny weak point. For the sake of your mental health, please do not fight Power Piston with Power Adapter. So, we've reached the end with 17 pros and 26 cons. As you can tell, I do not like this game very much. Its design is all over the place thanks to the 2 adapters, which happen to be both the game's greatest strength and weakness. Out of all the 6 games in the NES Hexology, this is the only one that still frustrates me on replays to this day, even though it's among the easier difficulty. Yes, there was an effort to amp up the presentation and the globe-trotting theme of the main stages, but that effort should have been put to refining the gameplay design above all else, instead of worsening it. And there's not enough high points to make up for it either. So with that, I'm going to give Mega Man 6 a rating of 4 out of 10. Mediocre. Well, that's the end of this review. If you like what you saw, consider giving a like and subscribe to my channel. Leave a comment if you have something to say. And as per usual, my Discord server, DeMontropolis, is in the description, so consider joining if you're new to the channel. So now that the Hexology is over, I want to get all other 8-bit Mega Man stuff out of the way before I move on to Mega Man 7. This includes the review for Game Boy 5 and any other pending boss guides. However, these are going to be stepping down in priority because I found myself enjoying games from other series and I want to cover and share them with y'all. I hope you can understand. And with that said, I'll be signing off. Take care, folks.